The night was unnaturally quiet. A thick fog had rolled in over the small, isolated town of Pine Hollow. The moon, swollen and pale, barely managed to pierce through the oppressive gray mist. A single street lamp flickered in the distance, its weak light illuminating the uneven pavement of Main Street. It was a town that seemed forgotten by time, and perhaps even by the heavens. Martha Green, a 54-year-old widow, sat alone on her creaking porch swing. She sipped lukewarm tea from a chipped ceramic mug, her tired eyes fixed on the empty road ahead. Martha was no stranger to solitude. Her husband had passed away 5 years ago, and her children had long since moved to the city. The radio buzzed faintly inside, broadcasting a weather report. Clear skies, no chance of rain. But Martha knew better. Something heavy lingered in the air, something that pressed against her chest like a weight she couldn't shake. Suddenly, her neighbor's dog began to howl. The sound was sharp and desperate, cutting through the silence like a blade. Martha's hand froze mid-sip, and she strained her ears. The howls were joined by frantic barking, followed by an eerie, high-pitched whine that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. She stood up, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders, and stepped off the porch. "Rex, what's wrong, boy?" she called, her voice trembling. But as she rounded the corner toward the neighboring yard, the dog's cries ceased abruptly, leaving an unsettling void in the air. Meanwhile, Kevin Lawson, a 27-year-old amateur UFO enthusiast, was parked on the outskirts of town. His beat-up van was filled with old cameras, radio equipment, and notebooks scrawled with conspiracy theories. He'd been chasing reports of strange lights in the Pine Hollow area for weeks. Tonight, his scanner had picked up a series of erratic signals, high-frequency bursts that didn't match any known radio patterns. "You sure this isn't just atmospheric interference?" his younger sister Amy asked from the passenger seat. She'd reluctantly joined him after losing a bet and had spent most of the evening scrolling on her phone, visibly unimpressed. Kevin shook his head, adjusting the antenna on his scanner. "No way, this is something different. Look at the modulation patterns. These aren't natural." Amy rolled her eyes but couldn't deny the unease creeping into her gut. She glanced out the window at the dense forest surrounding them. The trees loomed like sentinels, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. "Fine, but if I get eaten by a bear, I'm haunting you." Before Kevin could respond, the van's engine sputtered and died. The lights on the dashboard flickered before going out completely. "What the hell?" Kevin muttered, turning the key in the ignition. The engine groaned but refused to start. Amy's phone screen went dark as well. "My phone's dead," she said, her voice tinged with panic. "It was fully charged an hour ago." A sudden, blinding light filled the van, pouring in from above. It was so intense that Kevin and Amy instinctively shielded their eyes. The air grew thick and electric, humming with an unnatural energy. "Kevin!" Amy screamed, her voice barely audible over the deafening hum. Kevin grabbed her arm, pulling her close as the light intensified. The van began to shake violently, as if caught in the grip of an invisible force. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light vanished. Darkness returned, but it was no longer the familiar darkness of the forest. It was absolute, oppressive, and otherworldly. Back in Pine Hollow, Martha stumbled back toward her house, her heart pounding. She had seen something in the sky, a massive black shape, triangular and silent, gliding above the treetops. It had no lights, no sound, yet it filled her with an overwhelming sense of dread. She locked her doors and drew the curtains, her trembling hands struggling with the latch. Her phone buzzed on the counter, startling her. It was Sheriff Dean Carter, an old friend of her late husband. "Martha, are you seeing this?" he asked, his voice unsteady. "I don't know what I'm seeing, Dean," she whispered. "But it's not right. Something's happening." "Stay inside," he ordered. "Lock your doors. I'll check on you soon." As she hung up, a low rhythmic sound began to resonate through the house. It was faint at first, like a distant drum beat, but it grew louder and more insistent. Objects on her shelves rattled, and the tea in her mug rippled as if disturbed by unseen hands. Kevin and Amy found themselves in a strange, metallic chamber. The walls pulsed with a dim, bluish light, and the air was thin and cold. Amy clutched Kevin's arm, her nails digging into his skin. "Where are we?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kevin shook his head, his eyes scanning their surroundings. Strange symbols, glowing and fluid, were etched into the walls, shifting and changing as if alive. A low hum filled the space, resonating in their bones. Before they could process what was happening, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall and slender, with elongated limbs and skin that shimmered like liquid metal. Its eyes were black voids, endless and unblinking. "Do not be afraid," a voice echoed in their minds. It was not a sound but a presence, cold and invasive. Amy whimpered, pressing herself against Kevin. "What do you want?" she managed to choke out. The figure tilted its head, studying them with unsettling curiosity. "Understanding." As the being raised a hand, the room was flooded with light once more, and their screams were swallowed by the void. Sheriff Dean pulled into Martha's driveway, his patrol car's headlights cutting through the fog. He stepped out, his flashlight in hand, and approached the front door. He knocked twice, the sound echoing eerily in the stillness. "Martha, it's Dean," he called. But there was no answer. He tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. As he stepped inside, the rhythmic noise enveloped him. The walls seemed to pulse, and a faint metallic taste filled his mouth. "Martha," he called again, his voice trembling. He found her in the living room, standing rigid by the window, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Martha, what's going on?" Dean asked, gripping her shoulder. She turned to him slowly, her face pale and her lips moving soundlessly. Then she raised a trembling hand and pointed to the sky. Dean followed her gaze and froze. Above the town, the triangular shape loomed, its edges glowing faintly. Smaller orbs of light descended from its underside, moving with unnatural precision. "We have to go," Dean said, pulling Martha toward the door. But as they stepped outside, the orbs of light turned toward them, and the air grew thick with that deafening hum. Kevin and Amy awoke back in the forest, their van exactly where they had parked it. The engine started on the first try, and Amy's phone blinked back to life. But something was different. Kevin's hands trembled on the steering wheel, his thoughts jumbled and fragmented. Amy stared blankly ahead, her usually sharp eyes now glassy and distant. "We're going home," Kevin said flatly, though neither of them truly knew where home was anymore. In the rearview mirror, faint shadows danced just beyond the tree line, watching. In Pine Hollow, the triangular ship receded into the clouds, but its presence lingered in the air. Martha sat silently on her porch, her tea untouched, as Sheriff Dean drove away in silence, his eyes flicking to the skies. The rhythmic hum had faded, but it left behind an unshakable unease, a reminder that they had been seen. Above the town, the stars gleamed cold and distant, as if watching and waiting. The questions gnawed at everyone who had glimpsed the inexplicable that night. Would they return? And next time, would anyone survive? Thank you for venturing into the unknown with us on Twisted Nightmares Chronicles. If this tale sent shivers down your spine, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to uncover more twisted tales. Have a haunting of your own to share? Drop it in the comments below. Until next time, keep listening, but be careful what you hear and see. Stay tuned for part 2 of this video coming Tuesday.